Chapter 14. Time and Games. An existential time which is akin to eternity. There is no distinction between the future and the past, between the end and the beginning. In it, the eternal accomplishment of the mystery of the spirit takes place. Time is not the image of eternity. Time is eternity which has collapsed into ruin. Berdyaev. The game is simply the totality of the rules which describe it. John von Neumann and Oscar Morgenstern. We grow older toward death in the day-by-day linear passage of the hours. This is real time, in which we live in a mortal and limited way, offers no discharge from the war. It remains our lifelong combat zone, and like soldiers, if we are to keep our sanity, we must be rotated out of it every once in a while. Hence, men are always trying to get out of real time, to shift their activities into parallel ribbons and blocks of time. Millions take refuge in the divine world of games because the management and manipulation of time, especially in game form, helps us feel young. New and fascinating to humanity, television, as Marshall McLuhan has forecast, will soon connect the people of the global village into a single network of energy. Millions now turn on together and are present at the same event, and as we watch it on the screen, this event passes through all of us. Television unreels a communal ribbon of experience, providing each member of the audience with a parallel life track which travels alongside his own. We have in effect another life, the television existence. Sometimes it moves beside us on a second level. On other occasions, the television tape and our own unreeling life become as one, when, say, we join the march honouring the memory of Martin Luther King while sitting in an armchair. During periods of emergency, sudden moves for war or peace, at election time or during a riot, I have had the feeling without television of being walled off, having no windows on events. In this frame of mind, lacking TV, I feel out of touch with humanity. The trouble is, were I to step out of doors and actually try to see it with my own eyes, what was going on, I could at best be in only one place, whereas television seems to put me in the centre of the world and bring the entire mix of that day's history for me to watch with my feet up on a stool. Perhaps this massive and also passive sharing of the experience that comes out of the tube represents for millions the beginning in rudimentary form of an electronically born communal consciousness. Television, though the medium itself may be riddled by false time values, release me from my own lonely time. It carries me instantly to other worlds and zones of being where death is not real. In the side-by-side worlds of my living room and the passing television scene, with TV Guide to help, we look out passively on eternal games. The family sits with gods and goddesses on late-night shows, listening to them talk, watching them grow angry and argue and laugh together. Or staying with a late movie, I may go to the refrigerator for a beer. The cowboy in the frontier town is also having a beer. And then the commercial comes on showing the fellows at a tavern hoisting their beers, and I join them and the cowboy too. As life and television blend into a single ribbon of experience, it becomes increasingly difficult to say which track is more real, because having hung in front of the screen for too many days and nights, incorporating TV into me and transferring the sensitive part of my being into it, I may gradually have turned unreal, and in this way the shadow of a man attends flesh and blood events, passing with him in colour. Obviously, if the lives we lead all day long did not age and trouble us, or if we were not bored by them, people would not bury themselves in television. Our aim seems to be escape the human condition by living in multiple time zones. Television is the only one of many sanctuaries, acutely aware that everyone's journey leads to a bottomless pit. The anxious soul, we know, tries to reach a state of immortality now, Do it with the martinis, or find safety islands in the living deaths of roulette, bingo, bridge, and canasta. Many younger people escape from linear time, meaningless progression to death, by means of marijuana. This does not stun the senses, but sharpens them as we drift free. Psychedelic flights, as we have seen, carry us farther on journeys in which we can die without dying, and feel born again. Such travels take us to unexplored areas where, as Timothy Leary has said, the universe within our skulls is indefinitely more than the flimsy game world which our words and minds create. More acceptably, skiing, driving fast, racing of all kinds also remove time from us. On another level, the hours can be splintered by the rhythmic fall of pins on the bowling alley. One more zone of suspended time is filled by the voice of the radio disc jockey, his delivery so rapid as to be incomprehensible to adults. Condenses standard speech in order to annihilate the intervals between rock and roll numbers. The final explosion of pop time takes place in the discotheque. Here, crashing chords, acoustical bombs bursting in the air, lightworks and intermingled films knock out all doubt and fear until morning. Games, that is, formal sports and pastimes, may be best simulators of eternal life that humanity has at its disposal. They take place in their own special time, and no other on the playground of immortality. It is true that game begins, matures and ends like a person's life. An endless game would have no point. The contests, especially within the framework of league play, should be understood as successive experiences, little forms of reincarnation in which we participate directly while playing, or vicariously as spectators. Sport is death-free play, and games shut out death. We have the commonly recognized but still quite amazing circumstance that for masses of people around the world, the outcome of football, baseball, soccer, basketball, and boxing matches can sometimes be far more important than actual wars and revolutions. In wartime Europe, American soldiers returning from the front with their heads bandaged would yell at reporters, "How are the Dodgers doing?" For them, a World Series contested by older men and draft rejects had more emotional impact than the World War. Why does a grown-up alumnus moan and carry on when the old team loses? Why has it become necessary for moats to be dug around Latin American football fields to save referees from being torn apart? Ask again why national shame and mourning must be involved when, say, Brazil's cup loses to Hungary. And furthermore, not only the uneducated succumb to this madness. Oxford nuns can be depressed by bad news from the cricket pitch. With a few exceptions, the theatre offers nothing like this, since any play created from a script must be a fixed contest. Author, director, and actors all know how it is going to come out, but you never know how a game will end. During the action, unexpected heroes and goats emerge. The underdog rises up and plays the favourite. The momentum shifts. Pandemonium. But the team of desire strikes back, and the moral advantage shifts its way. Then, a sudden break, arrival of the counter-hero, charges the complexion of the game. What now? Will he triumph? Exhaustion? Despair? Wait until next time. The theatre can seldom match this. The only dramatic equivalent would be an entirely improvised play in which the characters themselves would not know from moment to moment how the action was going to end. The madness of spectators and the dedication of the players can be best understood if such games are viewed as man-made immortality rites. They take place in time zones relating only to the particular sport. The coaches and players become masters of time. In football, for instance, we become connoisseurs of managed time. At the close of the first half, or near the game's end, we eat up and kill the clock, control the clock, or let the clock run, or take time out and make it do special tricks. The stadium turns into a pit of the gods, in which heroes fight to become divine, and trailing behind them come the legions, all of us, fans and spectators, who derive our being, our excellence, and our own worthiness to be converted into gods from the performance of our heroic representatives. By itself, one game or of another may be only incrementally enjoyable, and only a few are likely to be crucial. Far more significant, and what builds up the hysteria attending public games, will be the long-term standing of the clubs and of individual players. Immortal possibilities are recorded in the form of statistics and of league standings. These form the steps in the ladder of excellence leading to heaven. As part of our split-level experience of sport, compounded by television's split screens and its instant replays, stopping time and immortalizing chosen moments, running them over and over again, we experience the game statistically as we watch the action. In ice hockey, we simultaneously appreciate not only the goal, but the asset. The number of goals the left winger has now has for the season, how many pucks have gone by the goaltender this year, which teams have scored most against him, and so on. In basketball, we have the same, minus the goaltender, and with the addition of rebounds and frequent foul shots. American football and baseball give the impression that the athletes are playing on a field of statistics rather than dirt and grass. Every play is immediately incorporated into an endless network of achievement. A football game provides the spectators with no more than 11 or 12 minutes of actual playing time. When something is happening on the field, most of the game is spent umpiring, trotting back to the huddle, and planning the next attack. In other words, what we pay to witness, for the most part, is periods of tension building to the next action. During this interval, everybody thinks about strategy, tactics, past performance, probabilities. In this way, nothing but somehow everything is happening, furiously, as if the statistics themselves were contending furiously above the battlefield while the players rested. Ridiculous as they may seem, at times, these elaborate sets of supporting figures endow the game with meaning by relating it to the entire sporting universe. For immortality hunters, statistics make imprints on the stars. They make it possible for players, experts, and fans to live in a beautifully enclosed artificial cosmos, in a death-free time of man's own making. All mysteries vanish. We have no need to ask the meaning of professional football. It means what it is. The management of games provides us with a clue to the satisfying management of immortality, which we see that in a utopia beyond time, our present game structures can serve as only models for the structures of successive lives that each man and woman will someday live out in eternity. This means that the eternity historical time would be replaced by a variety of game times. Put another way, if each of us had the power to live indefinitely, such a state would require simulations of clock time, just as artificial gravity must be provided for the colonizers of space. A certain emotional gravity will have to be offered restless natures newly freed from death. Only then can all human activities be enjoyed as games, and they will be taken seriously with emotional commitments as millions of us now take football. Chapter 15. The Great Defiance. The great defiance which turns us again and again into the enemies of God and our fellow men, even of our own selves. This defiance in us all, is the sin, the Lord and the Master we serve, for whom and by whom we are paid in return with death. This is the only reward this Lord and Master can offer. It is the only one we deserve. Karl Barth. In his inspirational sermon to the prisoners of Zurich, Karl Barth precisely defines the human situation. He describes death as the great no to mankind, and the shadow that hangs over all our human life and accompanies all its movement. What he denounces as the great defiance of this condition is nothing more than men's drive to live forever in the flesh. The formidable evangelist evangelist goes on in great rolling phrases, first to frighten the prisoners with the spectre of advancing death, and secondly, at the last moment, to extend hope of salvation. Jesus volunteered on our behalf to pocket the wages of sin. The wages of our sin were paid on Easter morning. The preacher affirms to his audience that the free gift of God is eternal life. This comes as the joyous outcome of the Easter story. It is no such thing, of course. The theologian himself has just died, and so will the convicts. We have once again the beautifully articulated ancient cowardly counsel. Accept. Kneel to the gods, and only they can decree eternal life for us. And furthermore, if you don't kneel, your sin may rub off on me. Barth could not be more eloquent, could not much more be eloquent, and the listener finds it exciting and pleasing to let himself be carried along these superstitious flights, but only for a while. Sooner or later we come back down unsaved with the brute death still there. Then, for some, a new and not particularly consoling revelation may be at hand, that phantasmic gods will not help us, nor natural order, which, since it kills us, is precisely what must be violated, and the old crime of hubris, with all of its attendant psychological dangers for self-punishing man, committed systematically in the open, has become our only chance of achieving salvation. Therefore, we appropriate Barth's term, but celebrate the great defiance rather than damn it. Needed for one thing is a bold new attitude. We must stop apologizing to the cosmos and affirm who we are. Having invented the gods, we can turn into them. Death no longer fits in our plans. Conceivably suitable for animals and plants, meaningless extinction becomes improper when inflicted on a species possessing ability to reflect and care about meaning. 5,000 years ago, the evolution of human intelligence made death, as applied to our side, inappropriate and obsolete. I'm going to go with that. Today, with the advanced elements of humanity, no longer are able to tolerate eventual non-being. Either death must soon become obsolete, or we will. Alan Watts has said that the normal state of consciousness in our culture is both the context and the breeding ground of mental disease. For the Immortalist standpoint, it would be amazing if this were not true. Each man, in Ortega's image, finds himself in the position of being brought asleep into a crowded theatre and suddenly awakened there to perform as best as he can. He awakens, as Heidegger says, thrown onto this whirling, wobbling stage to take part in a senseless drama that always comes to the same end. Nature generates him, tells him a little about life and death, and then whimsically kills him. In Pascal's succinct review, the last act is tragic, however happy all the rest of the play is, and the last little earth is thrown upon our head, and that is the end forever. With darkness closing in, Tolstoy's Ivan Ilyich cries out to silence around him. I shall not be, but what will be? There will be nothing. Then, where will I be, when I am no more? Will that be death? No, I will not have it. And would it might come very soon? What very soon? Death? Blackness? No, anything rather than death. Near the end, he wept over his helplessness, over his terrible loneliness, over the cruelty of men, over the cruelty of God, over the absence of God. Only the hypocritical, it would seem, could conceive of this torment endured by dying people as being anything less than a cosmic outrage. He can run, but he can't hide. This has now become the position of transitional man, our position as pre-immortalists. We live and work in a mad factory operated by an unknown employer. All we know is that monstrous conditions prevail. Every now and then, for no apparent reason, someone on the assembly line is crushed by an overhanging machine. We weep over the vanished one, who is then carted off to some oven or dumping ground, where the work goes on. No wonder we see humanity everywhere, by one means or another, go on strike against these conditions. Unfortunately, the strike tends to be conducted passively or self-destructively. For example, drinking too much, or in stupid and uncoordinated fashion. Struggling against death, we wreak violence on each other. Mankind has gone wrong here. We forget that we are brothers and sisters in the same trap. How much better to unite our energies in the fight against extinction, instead in opposition to one another. First, we have to organize against the gods of our own superstition, against the imaginary machine in the sky, which we have always supposed to mean measuring our efforts. We must understand that all ambition of the driven and anxiously competitive sort is founded on superstition. The idea that the gods or the sky calculator will judge our score and accordingly approve or deny our bids for immortality. It may seem ridiculous to insist on it, but we must each clearly understand, particularly when self-esteem trembles, that there is no recording angel, no recording apparatus to measure our bids for membership in the Olympian Society, that failure will not cause us to be blackballed in heaven as it does on earth, that we are all in this together, neither competition nor competitive scores counting for anything except on earth. Knowing this, we can much more easily work together in a practical way, taking part in the laboratory revolution against death, or backing it with interest and support as best we can. Symbolically, it is time to parade and picket together, our signs held aloft in defiance of natural law, and the non-existent lords of destiny should proclaim, but one message: don't accept this deal. Imagine being the only person on earth who is going to die, while all others around you live on. You vanish into the black void, they wake every morning and walk into the sun. How unfair, if not excruciating, and so far as we know, this will be precisely the fate of each of one of us. Why should not old men be mad? Yeats asked, and indeed, in our circumstances, why not all men? Humanity may congratulate itself for not having long since gone out of its head. Still, the sages chide us. Our justified neurosis is called wrong-headed, as though recoiling from oblivion we were completely uncalled for. Barth quotes Luther's rendition of the 19th Psalm. Teach us to remember that we must die, that we may become wise. And expanding this message to the poor prisoners of Zurich, the evangelist cries out, teach us, give us, grant us, create within us the readiness and the ability to remember that we must die. You, O Lord God, must teach us to number our days, like a teacher teaches the alphabet, and the 2 + 2 to a little child, who cannot know these things by himself. Greater men give us the same song. Jacques Martin, the man who knows that, after all, death is only an episode, is ready to give himself with humanity. An episode. When I read the paper, Banker dies after long illness, how do I react? Probably I think of it as a deplorable episode, and no more, but only because I do not make his disgracefully agonizing long illness real enough in my imagination. No, even after the pain, for both Martin and me, there will be no mere episode, but a permanent blackout. When the world and I vanish from one another, the world ends too. Voice preaching false consolation will not help us. No matter how skillfully and soothingly they arrange nothingness. Alan Watts, for one. Death seems simply to return to that unknown inwardness, inwardness out of which we were born. This is not to say that death, biologically speaking, is reversed birth. It is rather that the truly inward source of one's life was never born, but has always remained inside, somewhat as the life remains in the tree, though the fruits may come and go. Outwardly, I am one apple among many. Inwardly, I am the tree. This may be appraised as fine writing, and even a valid perception of man's place in nature, so far, but it serves also to pretty up and glamorize death, and therefore, in the context of humanity's long battle, to weaken and tranquilize our rebellion. In his essay, The Ideology of Death, Herbert Marcuse disposes of all such complacency. The extortion to make death one's own is hardly more than a premature reconciliation with unmastered natural forces, a brute biological fact permeated with pain, horror, and despair is transformed into existential privilege. From the beginning to the end, philosophy has exhibited this strange masochism and sadism, for the exaltation of one's own death involves the exaltation of the death of others. In Arizona, I have seen an elderly Princeton man, nearly terminal with cancer, groveling in a faith healer's tent, with sawdust all over him, begging for the charlatan's hand to be placed on his brow. And when the healer decided that day to bless all the sufferers at once, instead of one by one, there being too many, the man from Nassau, who had actually thrown money after him, began bellowing in agony, "No, no, on me!" until the hand of the sawdust master was laid on him. Then there is John the delivery man, with one lung already cut out, wandering near the corner, watching the people go by. His neck was withered to a stalk. His eyes are huge, shining with terror. Too bad he doesn't understand that his forthcoming annihilation is part of life. The babe died a beautiful death, a priest reported years ago when Babe Ruth died. "It's a privilege to die of cancer," said New Bedford, mass priest, because he had time to prepare himself for grace. I saw one of the prettiest girls alive carried away within weeks by a wild mole, and her roommate said, "If Helen dies, I'll never go to church again." Beauty and heroism should not blind us to the great abuse. As Camus once described it, what in the world is there to worship or accept in a system that makes cancer, among other ills and misfortunes, part of life? I wish I could blind my intelligence, retaining the gift of clever dialogue, and turn into one of those fashionably intellectual Roman Catholics or high Episcopalians, filled with the hip and haughty simulation of belief in a conservative mystery, or even bury myself in the Buddhist's vivid present. But I know, and so do they all at 2 o'clock in the morning, that these formulas and pathways serve finally as a systematized evasions of the void. I anticipate my own probable deathbed cowardice, and even possible conversion to some sort of faith, but until that time comes, I will be straight. The Immortalist argument holds this ground, and will not step back from it. That death from a deterioration of the body is an outrage, and should be unceremoniously treated as such. Do not go gentle into that good night. It does not apply here. Rather aim to not go at all. Mobilize the scientists, spend the money, and hunt death down like an outlaw. Go with Yeats, who confronted the discourtesy of death, or Ernest Renan. I feel death loathful, hateful, and senseless when it extends its utterly coldly blind hand towards virtue and genius. A voice telling us unceasingly that truth and goodness are the aims of your life, sacrifice everything else to these calls. But then when we arrive toward the end of our journey, where we should have found our reward, this philosophy, which promised us the secret of death, excuses itself with an embarrassed stammer. Railing against the end, of course, serves no purpose. Herbert Marcuse comes in with the clue that we need, a beautiful imperative. Have the good conscience, be a coward. Be afraid, but not passively so. Be not shivering, accepting and hiding. Also go beyond the bravado of Hemingway's and Mailer's grace under pressure style. Rather sweat out this fear in attacking action directed against its source, the very way in which the life process works, and change that. Centuries ago, Marcus Aurelius placed us in the situation that unhappily still defines who and what we are. Of human life, the time is a point and the substance is in a flux, and the perception dull, and the composition of the whole body subject to putrefaction, and the soul a whirl, and fortune hard to define, and fame a thing devoid of judgment, and, to say all in a word, everything which belongs to the body is a stream, and what belongs to the soul is a dream and vapour, and life is a warfare, and a stranger's sojourn, and after fame is oblivion. Faced with this dubious sense, the man of today does his best to escape feelings of helplessness, lunging about variously, envisioning himself, in the words of one psychiatrist, as a piece of shit, a wolf, a chicken, a whirlwind, or he may have added a saint. This goal has become increasingly popular, and the concept of sainthood hopelessly vulgarized to include the holiness of misanthropy and violence. The late comedian Lenny Bruce has been called a secular saint. Sartre has made John Jennant a saint, and we have also Che Guevara, Allen Ginsberg, and others. Since the qualifications for holy orders have been erased, a new order of saintliness may be suggested here, to which with courage we may all aspire. Our source is not our conclusion. If not our conclusion, is Roman Catholic. Jacques Maritain has said, what takes place in the soul of a saint at a crucial moment when he makes his first irrevocable decision, I would say, is a simple refusal, not a movement or revolt which is temporary, or of despair which is passive, rather a simple refusal, a total, stable, supremely active refusal to accept things as they are. This involves the interactive rupture of break concerned with an existential fact. Things are as they are, not tolerable, positively, definitely not tolerable. Of course, Martain's saint has a goal very different, at least on the surface, from that of the Immortalist, as the philosopher expresses it. Evil, the power of sin, and the universal suffering it entails, the rot of nothingness that gnaws everywhere, evil is such that the only thing at hand which can remedy it, and which inebriates the saint with freedom and exaltation and love, is to give up everything, the sweetness of the world, and what is good, and what is better, and what is pleasurable and permissible, in order to live free with God. It is to be totally stripped and to give himself totally in order to lay hold of the power of the cross. It is to die for those he loves. Maritain starts out on the right path. Sainthood does not indeed begin with the inspired and inspiring simple refusal of the current human condition, for the simplest of reasons. Things that as they are not tolerable. What is intolerable? The rot of nothingness that gnaws everywhere. At this point, once more, we come up against the centuries-old Christian confusion. failure to identify evil as a state of mind and action arising initially from the fear of death. The saint is rebelling against death. The rot he finds unacceptable is the neurosis of the race around him, the sickliness of all of the half-rebels, taking refuge in symbols and superstition. He correctly observes that the struggle for immortality and the competition between man and man for eternal life is cruel and undignified, and that it smells both of vanity and fear. Therefore, he abandons the competition, the scramble for divinity. He abandons all side and self-promotion, content to be totally stripped and give himself totally. That saint is of which Martaine speaks comes to understand through an agonized reversal in the paroxysm of simulated rebirth that one remedy for the fear of death is to embrace death. Though the simple refusal of fear, he frees himself through the simple refusal of fear. He frees himself to love God and others. Now a paradox, free to love human creatures as they are, to go with life as it is. He comes around to defending the human condition he once rebelled against, and we have one more tamed revolutionary. All the saints must be better and more profound than the rest of us, and almost by definition it is graceless to criticize them. But the unfortunate truth must be insisted on. Christian saints, valorous in spirit though they may be, undertake to cover over and justify the pointless sufferings of mankind, and in all nobility to pacify and head off humanity's revolution against death, of which, unconsciously, they were once leaders. From the Immortalist point of view, whoever teaches us to accept, or worse, embrace death in this world cannot be the last word in saints. A new kind of sainthood calls us. We begin, like all past saints, with a simple refusal. What must the new saint refuse? First, the acceptability of aging and death. Second, who aspire the new order of saintliness. We who aspire to the new order of saintliness will rigorously refuse our own superstitions. We will simply not permit them to take hold in our psyches. We will, above all, resign from the competition for God's favour, knowing that the rat race takes place under the auspices of death, of fear, the fear of extinction, which the saint recognizes is what impels us to confront one another in destructive games. We will abstain from cruelty, recognizing its source as despair over death and meaninglessness. Out of this very despair, we will do what we can to build a new brotherhood, unflinchingly acknowledge our vulnerability to death. The new saint will pledge not to injure others in the old scramble for preeminence, but join with others in the race's no longer disguised hunt for immortality. The new saint will not seek to die for those he loves, but to live fully and exuberantly for himself and them. He will never forget that he is a rebel. He will understand that sheer performance, style, and grace under pressure is no longer enough unless placed in the service of remorseless and unsentimental drive against mortality itself. Chapter 16. The Future of Unnatural Man. Modern man, however, must build his own personal world after making himself lord and master of his own life and death. Ludwig Binswanger. The being that exists is man. Man alone exists. Rocks are, but they do not exist. Trees are, but they do not exist. Horses are, but they do not exist. Angels are, but they do not exist. God is, but he does not exist. Heidegger. Nature is not holy. It is not sacred. Only we are holy and sacred. Our pleasure and fulfillment depend on moving with the natural energy that flows through us and all things, and also on controlling and redirecting that stream of energy wherever it threatens our well-being. We are that part of nature capable of reordering all the rest and turning inside out the very process that brought us into being. Prevalent for some time has been the intellectually chic view that man himself, particularly insofar as his consciousness has become highly developed, can best be understood as a disease, and all of his activities as some sort of cosmic excrescence. The metaphor of human life as defect appeals to great minds and small. It is a theme of Thomas Mann's in the Magic Mountain. We have from young, life itself is a disease with a very bad prognosis. It lingers on for years and only to end with death. Normality is a general constitutional defect. Man is an animal with a fatally overgrown brain. Jacques Charon takes note of Schopenhauer's conception that individuality in itself is a wrong, because at the bottom, every individual is really only a special error, a false step, something that better not be. We are at the bottom of something, and we ought not to be. Therefore, we cease to be. Similarly, Ludwig Klages decided that consciousness is the enemy of life and will destroy it, while Edgar Dark concluded that man is a freak, a sick primate. For Norman Brown, all organic life is then sick. Our sickness is part of the universal sickness in nature. Ruber calls birth catastrophic separation. We have stepped out of the glowing darkness of chaos into the cool light of creation. This is bad, Alan Watts believes. The opposition of human order to material chaos is false. Again, bright men joined in foisting on us the curiously seductive self-contempt. What strange being is this which enjoys describing itself as a disease, mistake, freak, and defect of nature? Another form of self-contempt has emerged in recent years. Thousands of readers enjoy descriptions of themselves in books such as The Naked Ape, The Territorial Imperative, and On Aggression, in which men are depicted as being little different from animals. The essential corruption of our species has been dramatized in still another way in William Golding's Lord of the Flies. Here, children on an island demonstrate mankind's basic cruelty. For some reason, the insistence on our fundamental brutishness comforts many people, perhaps because it seems to remove responsibility from them when they act in such an inhumane fashion. Consider the metaphor that humanity and life itself must be sick, and that the consciousness has made our kind ill. True, life on the planet may now kill itself, and if this should happen, human consciousness will indeed be the agent of death. Even without war, the stupid disposition of radioactive wastes, pesticides and detergents, contamination by smog, willful overpopulation, or massive worldwide psychosis can bring us down fairly soon. In such an event, any sterile survivors wandering around will have the gloomy satisfaction of pointing out that humanity was sick, that thoughts of death drove the species crazy, and so it killed itself, possibly deserving to die. The murderer of life on Earth could probably be identified as unnatural man. Still, we may take heart. Our doom is not dictated, since we have choice. And if we do not have choice, then disaster was fated from the beginning, and who can be blamed? Alan Watts reminds us of Goethe's observation. The most unnatural is nature. Even in resisting her laws, one obeys them, and one works with her even if in desiring to work against her. Now we find ourselves in a tricky game. Suppose nature on this planet has always intended, that is, always been programmed to kill itself. Bewilderingly, wheels within wheels turn in opposite directions. If the long range natural intent has been to foul and ultimately destroy the earth, then our detergents, smog, atomic bombs have all, according to plan, gone into the service in a suicidal Mother Nature, and our corruption of the environment by synthetic materials may be seen as part of the game. But if the natural intent of life is to continue without end, through species and individuals without process flourish, evolve, and die in their turn, then we, our revolutionary kind, may be a wild element in the cosmos, in that the overriding, if until lately disguised, drive for personal immortality has intruded to change all the rules. Whatever the original program may be, a new game evidently began as soon as human consciousness freed itself from what Bertrand Russell has called the blind empire of matter. The race now has become deeply engaged in the risky and supremely fascinating game of tampering with all things, a game that, given consciousness, had to be played. There can be no point in complaining about this or trying to back out. Rather, we must play well and win. The survival of all consciousness depends on the outcome. Anyway, it is not our fault that we are conscious, and, looking at the larger wheel, nature, by choosing to bring us forth, started a risky game with herself. There can be no question that unnatural man displays some appalling symptoms of hostility toward himself and his own environment. Among the worst of these may be his tendencies to foul the waters, air, and earth, and to insult the beauty of the world with trash of every description, billboards and abandoned automobiles. Well, when Timothy Leary said, "My cells hate metal," he was striking back, as so many younger people have in the last few years, against the desecration of flesh and earth by alloys originally intended to resist deterioration. Perhaps we litter the world like a campsite, partly out of a despairing and angry feeling that the earth is not our own. Each of us has only a short-term lease on life. Perhaps if the litterer felt that the earth really belonged to him, believed in some sort of resurrection or return, he would not sack and insult the landscape. Separated from nature and assaulting the earth in destructive and unbecoming fashion, millions may be judged sick with unbelief their illness. The Immortalist conviction is that the only belief in rebirth or the actual achievement of eternal life can restore the humanity to these separated people. Such as Billy Graham hear a call to give repeated injections of faith to an unbelieving citizenry, but shots of this kind lose their potency after a while. We find ourselves unfortunately on the verge of concluding that the race has entered a period of dangerous emotional illness, which only the renewed and believed in promise of immortality can heal. But what may meaningfully be defined as sick or viewed as unnatural? Bertrand Russell answers, "We are ourselves the ultimate and irrefutable arbiters of value, and in the world of value, nature is only a part. Thus, in the world, we are greater than nature. It is we who create value, and our desires which confer value. In this realm, we are kings, and we debase our kingship if we bow down to nature." The sickness of any living unit relates to the disordering and breaking of its form. A sick, ripening before rotting cheese would help keep well a man who might otherwise starve. One form's sickness or death contributes to another form's survival. Thus, an illness becomes sick when treated with penicillin. We speak of a sick plant, tree, or forest afflicted with blight, but never after spraying of a sick blight. Hence, sickness and health must be seen as value judgments applied to stages of a form's bloom and decay, with the choice of one term or the other, depending on whether we like that particular form and want it to live. A field of poppies may not be considered overgrown with weeds, because the blooms strike us as beautiful. The concept of a cure, then, remains wholly relative. The curing of any illness involves destruction of that illness's own form. A lawn is cured of weeds or crabgrass. If the flowers unexpectedly die, a garden is never said to have been cured of roses. Life kills life, gerontologist Dr. Alex Comfort has observed, cancer cells may be subversive, bent on preserving themselves and escaping the general debilitation of aging body. Now, looking again at unnatural man, should he be viewed as a healing agent or a disease in the planetary order of things? To the gods looking down, if there were any, he might by now appear as a blight, as well as a potential threat, and they would then be wise to weed him out. But death, we may ask once more, be natural for men? Only if they permit it. In the days of either or, we could assert belligerently that either we are free of nature and different from the rest, or we are following nature. If free, we are not bound by the natural dictates that control other forms. If we follow, then nature must have included our rebellion in her plans. Or, if she did not, then she can hardly be all-powerful, and made a mistake. In which case we need not bow down and worship her, nor embrace death as being a necessary end for our privileged species. But why impose either-or structures on the wheel of being? Say perhaps to set up the verbal ground rules for the struggle against death, that we are simultaneously both following and reordering the life process. We may properly imagine ourselves to be the climactic end product of consciousness, our species designed by nature, but also supremely self-designated to carry out an evolutionary decision. This decision has called for nature to turn on itself, countermand its own laws, and produce immortal beings. Infected by the human virus, it releases its higher intelligences from the birth-death cycle. Biophysics professor Robert L. Schinsheimer of the California Institute of Technology has pointed out that living organisms today have had the benefit of billions of years of selective molecular evolution. Soon, he has said, we will have that cumulative ingenuity at our fingertips, as well as in our fingertips, and with it not only the power to alter the natural world, but also the power to alter ourselves. We, the divine part, ascend over the whole, envelop the whole, turn the tennis ball inside out. The animate and fully conscious envelopes and controls the inanimate. We, the form of life that reflects and questions itself, enclose, rule over, shape, invade, order, give meaning to, and push around not only other life forms, but all the rocks and dust whirling in space, residues of the very energy of which we are composed. The saving thought is that it is man who has these vistas. Dr. George Wald, professor of biology at Harvard, recently observed, without our like, the universe might be, but not be known. Our grace is in the knowing. Neither light years nor microscopic infinity need frighten us. Quintillions of other molecular forms, a drifting assemblage of rocks. What is so impressive about the sheer multiplicity of things? There may be as many cells in my little finger as there are stars in the Milky Way. It doesn't matter. We are the cosmic virus. Galactic convulsions may someday be wrought by this tiny speck of the whole. Endless systems of rocks, a universal scrap heap, can become our building stones to be glued together and used as a base for satellite worlds whenever we need them. We will learn to manipulate the planet's own magnetic field. We will throw aloft shields of particles against cosmic rays. We will learn to forecast space cataclysms and guard against nova explosions that took place millions of years ago. One day we will discover how to navigate our globe like a new Noah's Ark and steer the planet's course between flames and black cold. Package ourselves, if need be, into electronic impulses and shoot for distant galaxies out of harm's way. A single problem faces us: to preserve our forms from aging and deterioration, to escape the parabolic arch of existence that ends in pain, dissolution, and ashes. We are here, in Heidegger's term, thrown. Consciousness always was and will be, or else it began with us. Either way, we are simply and foremost and only this matters, agents of consciousness. Our goal must be to see that everyone alive will be able to preserve his being from death by deterioration. Not likely at the moment, surely, but conceivably by deep freezing, but not forever impossible. Therefore, we must set out to control, insofar as we can, all parts of the environment capable of destroying the human body. Far from being a cause for despair, the absurd is our ally. Possibilities of accidental death hold no terror. Such catastrophes will happen. We have always understood. The absurd spices our days, providing relief from the relentless probabilities that lead us down the road to extinction. Infinity, too, can be accepted as a friend. It offers a never-ending feast of mysteries, and all the time in the world to solve them. The elastic earth thrusts up human forms, which in due time fall back into it. We must condemn as unnatural any attempt to resist this process. Let it be so, and let us be. The unnatural man acts from faith that his differentiated unconsciousness and his capacity for reflection exempts him from the rules governing our other forms of life. He knows, for instance, that the golden rule is precisely unnatural, yet often tries to live by it. No force but that of his own superstition or hostility to himself can defeat the unnatural man, unless the entire universe blows up, in which case we can forget the whole business. If no other intelligence exists, we are king. Assuming a divine intelligence, so much the better. We are a part of it. Our imagination must deliberately have been put on the task of doubting and opposing life unto death. If other sentient beings derived from a primal intelligence know all about us, still better, we have potential allies and brothers. Scorning those who glut themselves on Chanson's realities? Sartre has said, "Man is what he wills himself to be. After his thrust towards existence, man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." And Jung, the cleft which human Christianity has torn between nature and spirit, enabled the human mind to think not only beyond, but even against nature, and thereby proves I might say, divine freedom.